All right, we'll get started in a minute or so. And Lisa, if you could put up the agenda when you get a chance.
Hey, Walter.
Hi, Lynn. Glad you're here.
Okay.
Supervisor, it's going to take me a second. I have the Z-scaler issue, but I'll be right back.
Okay, right.
John, Mark, and John, Carter, and Mooney, and Mark. That was a good meeting the other day, yesterday. Transportation. Great group.
We can't get enough of it.
Hopefully I didn't say too much.
No, not at all.
I can imagine how you remember all those, Mark. It's unbelievable.
All right, while we're waiting for the agenda, I think we have, well, let's go ahead and I'll go ahead and start the meeting. We won't get into the meat of the agenda until we see the agenda. But I did want to just talk a little bit about schedule. I know that's something we have later on the meeting agenda. We still have a handful of task force meetings scheduled. We're definitely getting close, but we're also getting to the point where we're pushing into not for the task force, but for the ultimate adoption of any change to the comprehensive plan. We're basically pushing up against next calendar year, which is a challenge because that's an election year. So we try to keep at least major land use decisions out of the election cycle. So one of the things that we're looking at is working backwards from then, when we would need to try to have the task force wrap up. And what we are looking at is, I know there's several meetings underway with, oh great, Lisa's putting the agenda up here. I know several chapter leads have meetings scheduled coming up in the next week or two. Hopefully those meetings go well and we'll see some resolution of differences in approach between staff and the task force leads. If that is not possible, we're going to need to look at probably two versions of those chapters. And I want to try to minimize this as much as possible, but we'll be looking, if there's no resolution possible, at a task force chapter and then a staff chapter. So we hopefully can work through these during the next 2 to 3 weeks. And we're looking at the middle of August to have the task force. And I know it's August and it's a terrible time, but we're looking at the middle of August for a time when the task force would come back and see the entire compendium of task force recommendations. And at that point, also do any final consideration of amendments, as I've gotten a couple requests for amendments, which perhaps could be sorted out ahead of time, perhaps not, but at least to have that final endorsement of the complete task force recommendation. So we're looking, and there, oh, thank you, Lisa, for putting that up there. So let's see how these meetings go. If we can get resolution on the remaining chapters, let's do that. If not, then we're getting close to the point where we probably should look at a task force recommendation and then having a separate staff recommendation. Any comments or questions on that?
Walter, this is David. Just a question about, do you have a schedule yet for public comment, public hearings,
Engagement.
town hall things?
Yeah, the public hearings, the formal public hearings would not be until the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors. We're looking at probably November, maybe even December for Planning Commission, and then December or January for the Board of Supervisors. And it's starting to get a little uncomfortable at that point, at least for me, with the election cycle starting up next year. So hopefully we can, get those done before that happens, before the election cycle kicks in. In terms of public engagement, we just actually had a meeting, Lisa and I did, with DPD staff today, and we're looking at hitting the ground running after Labor Day and really pushing September and October for public engagement. So keep that on your radars as well. We obviously want to have as much as you can, individual task force members and chapter leads to participate in those public outreach engagement meetings. Tammy, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, please. Dennis Hayes is trapped in attendees.
All right. Somebody say
Thank you.
Dennis. Yeah, thank you, Tammy. Okay. Any
Walter,
other
my hand was up. Sorry, it's Lynn.
Oh, okay, Lynn. Hi, Lynn. Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the Village Center discussion last night. And I know that this was an unknown misunderstanding that was not exposed until we had the specific detail discussion. As we all know, the land use chapter is a very complex document with many moving parts. So the challenge to get everyone on the same page is sometimes difficult, as you can understand. So the important thing for us to do now on that subsection of the chapter is to seek the best solutions. So we, and I mean the land use working group, we are seeking the help and counsel of staff and senior staff. And we will revise as necessary and come back with the optimum planning language for the benefit of one Reston. So I just wanted to let you all know that we will do that in the most expeditious manner possible.
Lynn, thank you very much. And perhaps if we stay on the schedule of mid-August, that I think maybe for land use and for all the chapters to have all the, if possible, final wordsmithing done by that point. I think that would benefit everybody.
Okay, thank you, Walter.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Any other questions or comments about the schedule?
Just one comment, Walter, if I could, John Carter. I mean, that schedule sounds great, but I would urge us to see if we can't come to a conclusion on all the chapters and minimize the need to have the two chapter process. But I know that's a challenge, but we should not just sort of gravitate to the two chapter idea. We should work hard first to get it resolved. That probably doesn't need to be stated, but I just wanted to emphasize that if I could. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. I completely agree. It definitely makes yours and my life's a little more complicated to have multiple versions floating around out there.
Yes.
All right. Any other comments on the schedule? Tammy, yes, go ahead.
The topics approved to date does not include environmental stewardship. Number 5.
Okay, I think it's being added as we.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. Okay, any other?
Walter, this is Jennifer.
Yes, yes, Jennifer.
We have a parks and open space meeting. I want to say it's like the third time we've had it on the calendar. And we haven't been able to meet because we're waiting for a red line from. The last update I had is that we were having to be on Monday at the latest. The meeting is Thursday.
Very good. Thank you, Jennifer, for that update.
Jennifer,
Yes,
I thought we were getting something by, that we could discuss on Thursday.
yes, that's what I just said. We were supposed to get it COB Monday. And we don't have anything to do a Thursday meeting because we don't have a document.
Okay. All right. Anyone have any more insight into that or any other topic?
Let's move approval of the open space. Nice try, I guess.
Yeah.
I think the point is we could use some help and encouraging staff to get us that document.
Yeah, can I ask DPD, can you please provide the status update? Because I know there's been a lot of contention around that particular chapter.
I will have to check in with our parks staff just to get updates, and we can send out something tomorrow.
I appreciate it. Thank you, St. Clair. All right. Any other comments, questions? Okay, then let's dive into land use. That is the first substantive item on the agenda, although we skipped around just a little bit just now. So Lynn, I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Walter. Lisa, could you give me permission to share, please? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so tonight we're going to be working primarily from the land use reconciliation dashboard. As we mentioned last night, tonight we're going to focus on the first half of the land use chapter. So some of the items that you will note on the dashboard deal with the whole plan as we've identified here. So one of the global issues, of course, is the use of will and must throughout the draft plan. I know that staff believes that there are legal considerations that the county attorney should review and comment. The task force, this is the land use working group, prefers the use of will and must rather than should. We feel that plan language also that uses active verbs is preferred. And I'm going to ask if everybody could mute. There's some interference. I don't know, John Carter, did you have something you wanted to add to the discussion? Okay. The other item.
I did, Lynn. I had
okay.
one to add.
So I'm gonna let when you want to say something, please.
Okay. I thought the email that we got from Barbara Byron was really good on this topic. I would urge everybody to read that of what is the best way to express this. I hope everybody got that. So that's all.
Not sure what you're talking about, John. This is Mike Jennings.
Yeah,
Well, maybe Lisa could forward that to everyone on the
Good.
So thank you, John. Yeah, so in terms of looking again, this pertains to the whole plan. So I want to reiterate just how proud I am of the work that this working group has put together over the past 2 years, and what we are looking at as a result of that work. Of course, a lot of the work that went into the previous plan, of course, has contributed. But we really have considered every single word, and we've organized the chapter for ease of use and clarity. So there are some changes in terms of how it's organized. So, the language and the inclusion of graphics, we feel presents a cohesive and a cogent plan that flows very well and serves as a tool to the user and to staff. So the whole plan, we're really trying to improve clarity for the community. We want to make it easier for staff to implement and be accountable. And then the additional mix use percentages in the TSAs, in the TOD and non-TOD parcels, we feel really adds to the ease of use of this document, the way it is currently laid out. So we felt that, and initially staff had gone back in and changed the flow of the chapter by reorganizing and rewording the intended content. And they suggested removing the mixed use percentages. So in subsequent meetings with staff, and I want to thank, again, Bill Malin and Barbara Byron have been instrumental in helping us reach reconciliation on this item. But we feel that we do have reconciled these outstanding issues in terms of a broader plan perspective. So we have included graphics, as you've seen in the chapter draft. We are using a font that is easier to read, and we are including the mixed use percentages within the TSAs. Moving on to row number 5.
Excuse
So
me,
this is
I just have
where
a
we start
question.
getting it. Yes, Mike Jennings?
Yeah, thank you, Lynn.
Sure.
I guess I wasn't clear on this first row, whole plan above there. I guess would be row 3. How is that reconciled?
Well, it is reconciled because the land use working group has used will and must as it pertains to what has been used in the past, but we are also using active verbs. So if you go through and look at the plan language, so we're saying that the plan language in this draft attempts to use active verbs.
Okay, but is it still true that staff believes that legal considerations are outstanding?
Yes, and that the county attorney should review and comment on the final document.
Okay, I guess maybe
So
I'm
we
confused.
agree.
Maybe
We
I'm
agree with
confused
that.
at the term. Maybe I'm confused at what reconciled means, because that, to me, that would suggest it's still open.
Well, we both agree that the county attorney should review and comment on the final plan.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just interject for a second?
Well, of course, Gary.
I think that, what we've heard from Barbara Byron and so forth, we've got a pretty good reason to go the way we're going. And that's another reason for talking about reconcile, because we've been working with county staff.
This is David. Could you give us, since we don't have, I don't think anybody got that email, or very few, I certainly didn't. What does Barbara Byron say about the use of must? And, the document as it sits is replete with must. And although I admit that, I started out trying to use must and shall, and was persuaded otherwise because the attorney's not going to let that go through. So what is Barbara's solution to this?
You want me to answer that, Lynn?
We just
Yes,
got the
please.
email.
I just sent
So-
out the email. Everyone should have it by now.
Yeah, so you should get that. I think it's very informative. But if you use active verbs, then there's no issue. And the question is, do you go back and change the will and must? I guess we need to look at that. But if you use must, then it's suspect.
I would think that you would. I mean, I haven't read it, but if you're looking for active verbs, must is certainly active, but it's not the right word.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm not sure why we're still arguing about this. This is something that we're not writing. We're not writing a law. We're not writing. We're not enacting anything. We are recommending. And
Maybe I
know
can.
everybody wants to recommend must, but it doesn't apply. It doesn't fit.
Dave, maybe I can clear this up. We just heard from Barbara Byron back to our second set of questions, which was an assignment that Michelle took during a task force meeting a couple weeks ago. So it's not that we were hiding an email. We were going back and forth with Barbara, and we weren't, she wasn't finished yet. So we got back to Barbara this week on some of those follow-ups, and updating the land use chapter in the change was not possible. So I think what Lynn's trying to explain is that we're agreeing with staff, but it is going to take effort to update language in 60-page document.
Jennifer, you're breaking up. I got about 50% of that.
Everybody please mute who is not speaking.
Yeah, I'm getting feedback. I think that's why I'm cutting out. So we have been Michelle has been asking questions to the assignment that she received from the task force a few weeks ago to email with Barbara, and Barbara would get with the county attorney to send some sample language so that we could get some guidance. That email chain has gone back and forth a couple times. The last update we got from Barbara was this week. So we can't update the land use document until we're clear. That couldn't happen in the matter of a day or two. What Lynn is trying to explain is waiting for that guidance from staff. Barbara has sent us the latest iteration and answers to our questions, and the county attorney will look at the final document. And that's why we're labeling it reconciled. But it does need to still be finished.
Thank you, Jennifer. Does that answer your question, David?
Well, sort of.
Okay.
Again, I'm not sure why we're haggling over this.
Understood.
It's like it's become sort of a self-licking ice cream cone, and and just doesn't go away.
Interesting term. Okay.
David Vanell, I think when you read Barbara Byron's email of July 11th, it'll be clear to you. The must is still always the ordinance or legal type language. When you go to the active voice, y'all are calling it an active verb, it eliminates the need to use the word must or will. It says this is the action or in the plan, as opposed to this is the requirement. It still leaves it open to county staff and others to interpret whether they have to do it, but it is cleaner language, and it also makes this plan read better when it is in fact done. Just for your information. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mark.
you, Mark. Malcolm.
I'm fine with active verbs. As long as we lose the will and the must, we're okay.
Yeah, and if you'll recall, when we went through the Reston neighborhoods last evening and the recommendations that were made for single family and multifamily neighborhoods, we did incorporate the use of active verbs in that. Did I hear Tammy?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
One quick thing. If you read through the text, there will be statements like Reston will be growing, or we want, trees will grow, or whatever it is. There will be certain sentences of description that have the wills. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the language in recommendations. So that's where you get into, please, you try to not use will and must there, use active verbs or action words or however you want to phrase that. But it's the description getting to those recommendations may have will and must. And we probably try to get rid of them where we can, but still, is your Reston will be growing. Therefore, we must plan for whatever. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you. May we move on?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So the next item, so we're getting now, so we've moved from the whole plan perspective and we're getting into the details of the land use chapter itself. So the first item is the mix and uses and the mix of uses and densities. So as you all know, the proposed plan includes the mix of uses and densities and FAR on the graphics and in the titles for each land bay. And this is something that was newly added, hoping that it would provide additional clarity with conformance with the text. So column B, as you're looking at it, and I guess I could fix this so that the title will continue to scroll with us. But the land use working group feels that the inclusion of the FAR designations and the mix of use percentages to the maps provides additional clarity. As we were going through the chapter review with staff, we did note that staff is concerned with importing the graphics and text, as well as ensuring that the maps directly reflect the text so that there's no discrepancy there. So we did agree to work to ensure that there were no issues with the graphics and what is represented there. And we do need to add a caption underneath. And this is one of the jobs of the GIS department when they get to the maps, or if we need to work on the maps ourselves. Each of the maps will have a caption underneath it that reads, refer to text for details to the maps, because everything in those FAR maps will, that has the, I guess it's based on each subsection within Reston, within the TSAs. Those FAR designations will correlate to the plan text. But it is a way for staff and for developers and land use attorneys, anyone that is using the comprehensive plan as a planning document, to immediately see what is available within that particular parcel. So that has been reconciled. Staff has agreed that it is okay for us to move forward with the chapter, including those items. Additionally, one other item is the kind of the choice of words. Was more of a sweeping change of reference label for the Dulles Toll Road. The task force, or the land use working group rather, uses the generic Dulles Toll Road throughout the chapter. So the question is, so staff prefers the Dulles DAAR. So it's the Dulles Access, I guess, Airport Road, which is toll free. And we felt that the toll road is not the airport road. So we do feel that we prefer the use of the generic Dulles Toll Road in the description within this chapter. I don't think that we have reconciled this item. Of course, it's not showing reconciled, but we do feel that it is the correct verbiage within this document.
Mark Malcolm, may I make a comment to what that?
Please, Mark.
The
Thank you.
staff should refer to what the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority refers to. They refer to the outer roads as the Dulles Toll Road. And they make that distinction that the DAAR is what it is, a non-toll road, and that it can be shown by example with the website called www.dullestollroad.com, which is operated by MWAA.
Thank you, Mark. Well, I think
welcome.
that I think that kind of supports the working group's assertion that we should be using the Dulles Toll Road then, correct?
I believe
Mark?
correct. I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Well, we do have this is still, we had not brought this up with staff, so this is still an outstanding item that we will get resolved with our next meeting, and we can probably add it to our agenda with the village centers. So thank you, Mark. I appreciate that.
Can I make one comment, please, on that?
Yes, please, Tammy.
Clarification. Where you see the Dulles Toll Road, or where you will hear it or read it, is in descriptions of where different parcels are in Reston. Are they south of it, north of, or south of it, or north of it? So it's not like we're discussing the Dulles Toll Road per se. It's just a geographic feature, and people are not familiar with DAAR. They are with the Dulles Toll Road. Hence,
right, it's a landmark.
Yep. Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Okay, so we have village centers aptly highlighted. So there was a question, I think that it came in from Shane Murphy, maybe, very late this evening, about the difference between reconciled and resolved on this dashboard. So resolved is an item within the discussion between staff and the working group where it is not necessarily reconciled. So staff may not agree completely with the position of the land use working group, but the land use working group is putting forth a recommendation. Therefore, the recommendation is resolved within the working group. So we don't say that anything is reconciled unless we have consensus with staff. So village centers at the time that we reviewed this last night was not reconciled. It was resolved that the task force makes this recommendation based on the work that we have done researching and convening over the last 2 years.
Would it make sense to use recommended in place of resolved if that's the case? Because I'm still a little, what I think you're saying is reconcile means that staff and the working or the subgroup are on the same page.
Right.
Resolved means
that the task force recommends. Yes, and that's what it says in the comments is that. So it's more of a resolution that the task force is recommending. So, and if we move down, I'm sorry, Shane, what was your suggestion?
I think the only thing just because there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on this document, would it be better to use recommended? It's task force recommendation rather than resolved, because I think resolved suggests that there's been actual resolution, right? And maybe recommended versus reconciled would be easier for folks who are looking at this who haven't had the benefit of our discussion.
I will bring that back to the working group.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the suggestion.
I agree with Shane. I think to use the word resolved when all that really means is the subgroup has made a decision is a little misleading. So if it was the word recommended, that makes a lot more sense to me.
Okay, well, thank you. So the next time you look at this document, you may see all of the resolved changed to recommended. But I can't make that sweeping change right now, right at this time, without discussion with the working group.
That's
But
fair.
thank you.
That's fair.
I appreciate that. Thank you. All right. So we discussed village centers last night, and I think that we know what we need to do there. So the next item in the dashboard is the land uses exempt from density calculations. So the issue is that the proposed text recommends deleting the exemption for hotels, retail, and public uses from the density calculation. This provision was included as an incentive for these uses to be provided in Reston. The land use working group's position is that we exempt certain uses from the density calculations, and that that exempting certain uses from the is problematic. So staff has tentatively agreed with this, and we are considering this item reconciled. And I think that I saw an email. Was it from Bill Penniman, who is not able to be with us tonight? But he had an issue with this, or did I misunderstand his email? I think Mike, you could probably.
I think he did have an issue with it.
So I think what I would like to do, if I may, I know that we did have this discussion with staff, and we feel that the exempting hotels and retail is specifically problematic. Public uses, I think, is something that we were kind of thinking that there may be an opportunity, and maybe I'll ask John Carter to weigh in and give us a little bit more detail on the discussions that we had. Are you there, John? Are you muted?
Yes, I was mute. I
Okay.
assume what we're after here is to actually resolve this in terms of the full task force. But in terms of my thought is that exempting hotels is probably unfortunate at this point. We shouldn't do that. We have 9 of them, as I count, already approved. We probably don't need to give extra density for hotels. Retail, the problem with retail is there's not a good definition of what retail is. So are there some stores that should be excluded and some stores are okay? We all smile about hookah bars. Are we trying to promote hookah bars? Are we trying to promote banks? Are we trying to promote restaurant? What is it that we're actually trying to promote in retail? So retail was eliminated because the definition isn't clear. Public uses was harder to resolve, as Lynn was saying. So are there certain public uses that you would want to do that? And I think one of the public uses that was proposed was a school or a university. So maybe for something like that. But our other public uses, we don't usually do that in Fairfax. So I frankly wasn't really sure where to go. Are jails exempt? Are certain other kinds of public uses should be exempt, but not others? It's hard to parse this. So it's kind of up to the full task force, I guess, without too much guidance. But I wouldn't do hotels. I think that's not appropriate at this point. Retail, I think, is difficult. So
And I guess public uses would aptly be corrected to put indoor public uses, or are we talking about
yeah.
outdoor as
Oh,
well?
it would be indoor because it's an FAR issue.
Right. Okay.
So does anybody have
So
some thoughts on this?
Yeah, John, Lynn, this is David again. I can maybe see a reason why a large hotel or a hotel chain, something like that, might not need this exemption. But when you talk about retail establishments, especially local ones, especially mom and pop places, so to speak, every dollar counts. And although the money realized by Fairfax County for these things is not that great, I'm not sure it's a question of money. I think it's a question of incentive, a question offering a business owner an opportunity that otherwise maybe he or she wouldn't be able to do if or go someplace else where the price isn't quite so high. I think it might be difficult for the county to come up with a list of what's included and what's not, but I think we should make that effort rather than just tossing this whole section out.
Maybe a concern about how much of an incentive. I mean, are these 100,000 square foot big box stores that we're giving incentives, or is it the small mom and pop store that's less than 10,000 square feet? We just had trouble defining this and how to make it actually work. Usually you give incentives for something, as you were saying, David, that struggling to work. I mean, everybody would promote, for instance, affordable housing gets a incentive. We weren't able to come up with a definition for retail of that. I see Tammy wants to talk.
Tammy?
Thank you. I've been reading some cases on this in Fairfax County, and John hit the nail on the head. Our issue was there is no appropriate definition of what retail is, and there have been tragic circumstances in some, it's obviously not happening in Reston, but in some other areas of the county, and where adult bookstores or hookah bars are coming in, and they have very strict at the hookah. Let's talk about hookah bars for a second. Very strict regulations inside the hookah bar for air purity. Well, how do they get that? They shoot the crap outside, and the neighbors get it on their deck, and they are unable to enjoy their property that's adjacent to the strip shopping center. So there are so many different ramifications for that you would never think of. When you think of retail, I'm with you, David. I think of the mom and pop stores and want to encourage that. But we just don't have a legal definition of it. And then, geez, are you gonna be accused of being against hookah bars? And it's like there's a problem with this. It's a zoning issue. It's a quality of life issue. How is that resolved with definition? So that the definition is the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Yeah, so I hope that this discussion gives you all an appreciation for the consideration that this working group considered during the course of the last 2 years as we're evaluating and really trying to think what is the best outcome for the community. And for integration into the comprehensive plan land use chapter.
Len, this is Jane. Can I
Yep.
just a couple of comments? First off, when we're talking about public uses, we're typically not just talking about the institutional uses, the county uses, but also a public use the developer might put into a development. I'm assuming that's part of that. Where, you know, in Tyson's, if you're putting in a public facility, typically it is exempt from FAR because it's being dedicated to some form of public use, whether it's privately or publicly owned, it's being dedicated to a public use. Secondly, as to retail, I understand that the difficulty with coming up with that definition, but I will say that in lots of areas right now, our clients are struggling to be able to put retailers into these areas where retail is really something that the county wants to encourage. And so then subjecting those to floor area ratio calculations could create a situation where, you know, you don't have as much of an incentive to put that retail in because you're trying to put it into other uses that have better return.
Shane, this is Mark. I feel compelled to uh, explain, I guess, or correct the record because I think there's some mixing of apples and oranges here in terms of how the current plan reads. The way the current comprehensive plan reads, it identifies 3 use categories: hotel, retail, and institutional uses. It says that hotel uses and retail uses and institutional uses are exempt from the non-residential use category for the purposes of determining the appropriate mix of uses specified in the land use categories, provided a firm commitment is made and proffers to provide these uses. And I'm reading directly from the plan. It then goes on to say to encourage institutional uses and quasi-public uses as part of mixed-use developments. The square footage associated will not be included in the overall calculation of the proposed FAR, provided that the institutional or quasi-public use does not constitute more than 1/4 of the total development. However, it will be considered in all other aspects of the development, including traffic analyses. So the current plan doesn't exempt these uses other than public and quasi-public, institutional and quasi-public uses from FAR calculations. What it does say is when you are calculating the conformance with residential and non-residential use categories in the land use mix, you can exclude those uses from that calculation. The reason that that was put into the current comprehensive plan was because for decades, that what are now the transit station areas had been developed as heavily office and flex industrial spaces, not as residential, in large measure because of the presence of the RCIG covenants. And the concern was that developers would continue to build more office and not sufficient residential to provide the ridership necessary to justify the expense and the extension of the rail. And so the idea was to not penalize developments that provided the type of ground floor amenities and other quasi-public uses, institutional and quasi-public uses that we wanted to see in those areas by counting that against the permitted mix of office development that otherwise historically had occurred in the corridor. So it was never, the retail and office was never exempted from the FAR calculations. It was only exempted from the mix of use calculations. And it was done intentionally to encourage developers to build less office and more residential within the TSAs to provide the ridership necessary to pay for the metro operations. Because if there's not enough ridership, you end up with subsidies paid for through the general real estate tax.
Thanks, Mark. That makes sense.
Which is why, just as an extension, I don't think we should be changing this because I don't think that circumstance has changed or that desire to create the ridership on the metro has changed, or if it has, I'm unaware of it.
So could you provide a specific example, Mark? Just a hypothetical one?
Sure.
I understood.
So take Boston Properties at the Reston Town Center
Well,
station,
It
right?
doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be just make up a site.
Well, let's say you got a 1 million square foot development,
Yes.
and you're providing with your use mix expectation is 50-50 residential to office. Really, we've always thought of it in the context of residential to office as opposed to residential to non-residential. And if you want to encourage the development to provide the ground floor retail, the hotel, the college or university space, whatever it is, churches, whatever it might be that is necessary to create and support a community, to provide that as part of a mixed use development at the transit station areas where the land costs are the most expensive in all of Fairfax County. The way that you encourage it to happen is you don't have that count against their office component. So they could build, let's assume for the sake of discussion, they wanted to do 50% office and 45% residential and 5% other uses. The idea would be that the 5% of the other uses, including the retail and institutional uses, would not count towards non-residential to where suddenly you're at 55-45 non-residential to residential. You are 50% office and 45% residential and 5% other. So we didn't lump the hotel and retail into the same category as the office, such that if you provided 1 million square feet where 500,000 was office and 500,000 was residential and other uses, the other uses didn't throw you out of balance relative to the use mix.
Yeah, I'm dense. I still don't get it. So in your 1 million square foot example, so right now the term is non-residential versus residential. That's how the whole comp plan is written. It doesn't talk about office. It's residential and non-residential. So
Well,
in this example, you're saying that if you had 1 million square feet in the non-residential, you could go up to say 60% of non-residential, assuming 10% of that is retail or hotel.
Correct.
Or is
Correct.
that what you're saying?
Correct.
And 45
Correct.
the rest.
Correct.
And Mark, John, it sounds as though Mark is saying that what his example pertains to is mix of uses and not density.
Correct.
Right. So the
The
overall
only-
density would remain the same.
Correct. And that's the way the current plan reads. The only thing that is exempt from the FAR calculation are institutional uses like churches, schools. I can't remember whether childcare facilities are included in that definition. I think that they are. And then quasi-public uses. So quasi-public uses are, I can't remember what examples are, but like metro transit center offices, right? That are not public in the sense that Fairfax County doesn't own it, but it's a quasi-public use. Because the concern was at the time, right, that developers wanted to maximize office because that's what they've always built in the toll road corridor. And so the plan wanted to not discourage, but to limit the amount of new office that got developed in favor of developing all of the other things that are necessary to create a mixed use community. And so you could still do 50% of your development as office, but you could have other mixes to make up or other uses to make up the other 50%. Because even though retail is non-residential, it wasn't going to count towards your commercial component in your use mix. but the FAR stayed the same either way.
Right. Allows you to go down in the residential is
Right.
what it,
No, look, I could argue, I mean, I'm not here to debate whether 50% of office is correct. I'm just saying that we're mixing apples and oranges and
yeah, I get that.
purporting to change something in the plan that was never there to begin with.
Thank you, Mark.
Could John comment on that again and we come to some conclusion? Sorry to interrupt.
Can I have a brief comment, please?
Of course, Tammy.
Mark, how do we deal with this crazy situation that we keep seeing at RPZ where hotels are the equivalent of Starbucks? I think Comstock got 3 or 4 approved in their development area north of the tollway, and we've got 9 approved in Reston. How many hotels can Reston take? So that's a concern.
Right. Whatever the market will bear is what is what you can take.
Well,
I mean,
see, and that's
it's
part of the issue is that people are choosing to assign hotel usage and then it never gets built. And, you know, it's like, how do planners plan if the uses that are approved aren't ever built? Or is that not a concern?
it's I guess I'd answer it this way, Tammy, which is all of these things go in cycles.
Yes, exactly.
And
Hotels are hot ticket.
and if it didn't, I wouldn't have a job, because part of my job is to go back in when something that you had the best laid plans of mice and men would get built never happens because the market doesn't support it. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of that all across Fairfax County, where property owners had stars in their eyes and they got something entitled that the market didn't support, either for locational reasons or otherwise, and they've got to figure out what they're going to do about it. That's why it's called a plan and not a promise, because you plan for what you think you can do, and maybe it happens and maybe it doesn't. I mean, I've got a situation, well, I shouldn't say I've got a situation. I worked on a case over in the Lee district where 10 years ago, when the Fort Belvoir base relocation efforts were underway and they moved a bunch of people from the Pentagon down to Alexandria and the engineering proving ground in Springfield, I had a client who got 2 office buildings entitled because they thought that all of the defense contractors were going to follow all the intelligence agencies down the 95 corridor south of Springfield near Fort Belvoir. And so they built 2 buildings on a speculative basis. And they had exactly 1 tenant that took 5,000 square feet in 2 buildings that were over 500,000 square feet in total. And 6 months ago, Amazon bought the 2 office buildings and are going to tear it down and turn it into a data center. Literally nobody but 1 tenant has ever occupied the office space. And so it's an expensive lesson to learn that you overshot the market, but that happens all the time.
Lynn, can I say something? Lynn?
Of course, Jan.
Okay. I just wanted to talk about the retail that's being put in. We talk about building for people that need low income housing. And then we have Reston Town Center, and everything that's in Reston Town Center is not affordable for people who are low income. And I was wondering if there's any way that we could put in some retail that would be affordable rather than high-end shops that are charging more than can be done. The Reston Town Center is for the rich. It's not for people with low income. Is there any way to reconcile this, or
I'm afraid that in terms of the land use chapter recommendations, I don't think, and the fact that we are a Dillon state, I don't think that we can be as that prescriptive of which retailers go into which spaces. I'm sorry. Somebody else can weigh in on that. I'm not a land use attorney.
Well, just something in the plan that says it's encouraged that retail spaces, it's encouraged that entities consider those who are low income affordability or something like that.
Yeah, Jan, it's Walter. I think somewhere I've seen in drafts, it may be in the equity chapter, maybe in earned density, a discussion of economic diversity as it relates to retail. So I think there may be some language come up in a future chapter that tries to at least encourage that.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you.
Do you want me to offer a proposal? Not that there's a little danger in me.
Yes, John,
because it's on the
please.
fly, but
No, I think that if there is proposal, now, are you making a proposal for us to consider an edit to the text so that we can get this voted on?
yes, and I'll just put the
Thank you.
proposal out
Yes.
there. That doesn't mean we have to approve it. I just want to lay something out. The hotels bother me. I think we shouldn't be giving an incentive, however you want to do it, for hotels. I just think of our affordable housing. That's an appropriate incentive when you're talking about additional density for that, or you're talking about changing the mix. I just hesitate doing that for hotels. In terms of retail, I guess I'm going to stick with the language we have. We have elsewhere in the plan, I believe, great incentives on providing retail, particularly along our major pathways. So I don't know that we need to change our use mix. And I think the definition of retail is very difficult to resolve. So I would leave retail and hotel out of this with the assumption that retail, we can still encourage that along these major pathways, major connections to Metro. In terms of the public uses, I kind of liked some of the language that Mark was using, and I don't remember what's in the plan, but I think not keeping it wide open is restricting it. Number one is how much, what percentage of it, and I think we have something like that already in the plan. I think it's 40%, which is a pretty high number. And then maybe listing a university. We're struggling to do that in the Wheelie area. Maybe the schools, we're going to struggle to find schools. So maybe some FAR incentives for those. And then my last comment is, I'm not sure where you want this to apply. Does it apply everywhere in Reston? Does it apply just in the TSA, just in the TOD area of the TSAs? And I guess if it's public uses or institutional uses, it could apply everywhere, I suppose. So that would be village centers, the convenience centers. I'm not sure about that. So anyway, that was my proposal, is just leave our mix of residential and non-residential, not residential and office, residential and non-residential. Leave hotels off.
Yes.
Leave retail off because of the difficulty in defining it, and maybe Jan's suggestion, I think, is a good one, and maybe earned density, or maybe in the equity chapter, we can put some language in there about that. And again, there's already some language about strongly encouraging it. And then institutional, as long as it's limited to the square footage, if it's 40%, that's a lot. And maybe limited to the type. Certainly schools and universities would be the most appropriate. So I don't know, what does the group think about that?
So John, this is,
May I make a comment to this?
Sure, I'm just throwing it out for
the mix-
discussion.
the mixed
That's
use
good.
definition doesn't exist to the Reston portion of the comprehensive plan. The mixed use definition exists at the county level. And it is inclusive of the other things.
Yes, that's right.
Development may contain a mix of office buildings, retail establishments, hotels, housing, and related uses.
Yes.
So you gotta be, to suddenly have a change or restriction within this, we need to be focused if that is in fact possible, because people look at the county as a whole and then also look at the Reston comprehensive plan, portion of the comprehensive plan. And I'm not sure how to reconcile a greater restriction in Reston versus the county as a whole.
No, this would be the same as, my suggestion would be the same as the county as a whole.
Understood, but with that, it has
Except
the
for the
definition
institution.
that is broader as we have it right now, not eliminating these other things like hotels. It's defined already in its definitions at the policy plan level.
Okay, but the proposal is just lump hotels and retail in with all the other non-residential. You wouldn't segregate them out. They would just be part of the mix. And if it's 50-50, then it's included in the 50-50. If it's 75-25, it's included in that. You don't exempt it from the mix.
Roger.
In the case of residential and hotels.
John, if it's helpful, PDF page 107 of the current comprehensive plan, which I don't know how that lines up, but if you go on the special areas section
it's
of the county's
Page
website,
107.
page 107 is where this is discussed. The reason that the hotels are included is because the plan talks about they have less impact on the road network.
Right.
Because they're coming and going throughout the day. Institutional uses generate off peak hours and diversify the type of uses. So
Is it this paragraph, Mark, that's on the screen?
well, it's that whole section. If you scroll up, Lynn, a little
Okay.
bit, it's the whole section.
Got
So
it.
it just talks
Thank you.
about providing retail hotel. If you look at that language in there, that's the reason that it was included in there before. And so, look, I'm not going to fall on my sword over this, and I don't know that anybody's actually ever utilized this.
That was going to be my question.
I think the concept is just talking about how these are important community building uses that don't have the same peak hour impacts as office and residential. And so that was part of you need these things to create a community, which is why there was desire to incentivize them.
So what I'm hearing, John, is maybe we're saying to provide retail and institutional uses. And given where we are with hotel now.
No, just institutional, not retail, just institutional.
Oh, just institutional. Okay.
Yeah. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not saying that's.
Yeah.
Let me,
John, think...
Mike Jennings, on the P&Z, on the P&Z committee, we often are trying to wrest some kind of retail out of applicants. And so I think removing any kind of incentive to put retail in is not is not helpful to us to try to put retail like we've talked about in this task force, even though we haven't, like grocery stores or CVS's, we need to incentivize those first floor retail. So I'm not in favor of removing anything that is currently an incentive.
Are you concerned about the type of retail?
No, I'm not, because, I mean, it will be what people aren't, retailers aren't stupid. They're not going to put something in a, that's why have you seen any hookah bars in Reston Town Center? No, because they're not going to, nobody's going to go to it. I mean, these discussions about wild ass, retail stores, I think are, it's just kind of crazy to me.
Would you want to limit this to the TSAs? Or all of Reston?
I think this is already limited to the TSAs.
Yeah, it's limited to the TSAs already.
If I
Okay,
could add something to what Jan suggested about kind of affordable retail, if we hadn't decided that we didn't want to, if we hadn't decided we were going to exclude um, density and the additional density or additional residences in the village centers, and therefore have difficulty placing affordable housing there, we wouldn't, maybe the village center would be a more affordable piece of property for less expensive retail to pop up.
Well, I think that this language only appears in the TSA section.
I mean, what I'm talking about is having Reston Town Center. People who
Right.
low income should be able to go to Reston Town Center and buy something or do something that is in their means. And to have it at the village center keeps them away, keeps them out of TSA. And I don't think that that's right.
Mark Looney, is there an equal protection issue if we would prohibit some retail but try to prohibit others?
Oh boy.
yes.
So not an, I mean, what you can do is you could, for example, I think it's already limited. The existing language talks about ground floor retail. So what you're really talking about is theoretically, if you got a second Wegmans or a competing entity to a Wegmans, then theoretically that qualifies. But the reality is the majority of these buildings are unlikely to have 120,000 square feet of retail in the base of them. I mean, I think most of them have anywhere from 5 to 35,000 square feet, maybe 50,000 square feet at most in the ground floor of the building. So within the TSAs, you're not talking about significant space, but you could draw a line that says retail spaces that are under, pick a number, 25, 35, 50,000 square feet could be exempted, so that you're not sweeping in, the second Wegmans into that exemption. Because I think the larger point, and I've heard the supervisor talk about this in the past, is trying to encourage, locally owned retail facilities going in, right? And anybody that's above 35,000 square feet is not likely in that category. So you could
But
draw
Mark,
a line that says it's 20, retail spaces below 25,000 or something like that, or the first 25,000 square feet would be exempt. That's one way to do it.
but Mark, that would be regulating by amount of space rather than type.
Correct.
Just as with signs, you can regulate the size of signs, but not the content.
Correct.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is that the general feeling amongst this group is that this land use is being exempted from, it's not density calculations, but mix of use.
Lynn, for what it's worth, from my perspective, if we kept the use mix exemption for the first, pick a number, 30,000 square feet of retail, plus the institutional and quasi public uses, and you left the hotel out, I'm fine with that. I do think that if you're trying to incent the public uses and the institutional uses, churches, childcares, other sorts of
Yeah.
things, I think exempting those elements from the FAR calculations make sense in addition to the use mix.
Okay. Okay, so
Because that-
thank you for that. I will bring this back to the working group. But I'm sure that we'll have no problem making that change. Do you agree? Well, I'm not going to ask the land use working group members right now. We don't need to work through that. We've got a lot more to go through. I think we've killed this one. So the final recommendation here from this discussion, I'm understanding, is to keep the use mix exemptions minus hotel. Correct?
Right.
With a square
Okay.
footage, with a square footage cutoff.
Yeah.
And we'll have to discuss that.
And then for the institutional, that's the FAR, not, and the mix, I guess, for that. I guess that would be need to do the FAR plus the mix, right, Mark? For institutional.
Yeah, I mean, I think, John, the original thought when we talked about this 10 years ago as we were drafting it was like we wanted to encourage Marymount University and Northern Virginia Community
That's
College
exactly right.
and others to come back into the community.
And they did.
And
I
and
thought
they
it was the
did,
University
right?
of Virginia.
Yep.
But at the time, you know, I don't know that when we went through the entitlement process on any of those things that we necessarily called out this exemption. But just because we didn't use it doesn't mean that it's not appropriate to keep it in there.
Okay.
Yeah, we're certainly
All
not
right.
getting it, and so
Right.
I actually had a bias for the University of Virginia, but anyway, that's
Okay, this was rigorous discussion. Thank you all so much. I'm looking at the clock and we've got 40 minutes. So if we could, I appreciate all of the input. It's very valuable. And I'd like to move on to Reston Town Center North. So right now, I know this is gonna be another 40-minute discussion. Sorry, Walter. But Reston Town Center North. So the proposed plan provides separate recommendations for the Inova blocks and the remaining county-owned properties. The land use working group feels that we should leave this section alone as written. And we've had very recent discussions, as recent as yesterday and definitely Friday, given that the Reston Town Center North Task Force has been created, and this is going to be led by Kate Hanley, to finalize the recommendations for these county-owned properties and modifying the existing text. So we really feel that those modifications are not needed because that's going to be coming from a new task force. So from a staff perspective, I think that we accurately captured staff's perspective in column C. So staff did not support the proposed text for either the Inova blocks or the county-owned properties. They are recommending additional commercial density up to 250,000 square feet for the Inova blocks. I think we had limited that within the plan text to 100,000. For the county-owned properties, the staff proposed deleting the square footage for all the civic uses, including a performing arts center, and adding at least 191 affordable dwelling units. You can read what is on your screen, but for those that have dialed in, if anyone has dialed in by phone, staff is concerned that the proposed text is not flexible and changes are needed at this time. So staff is requesting to add 250,000 square feet of non-residential uses for Inova, to add a performing arts center, to add a substantial amount of residential uses to the civic blocks, and to delete the square footage for the civic uses, including 43,000 square feet for the library and the 90,000 square foot indoor athletic facility. So again, you'll note the use of the term resolved, using Mike Jennings' recommendation. we would say that it is recommended that we retain the existing language as is in the draft plan, because it is going to be changed by the new Reston Town Center North Task Force. And I think I saw Dennis Hayes trying to get a word in edgewise.
Well,
Are you there, Dennis?
hi.
I know you're in Louisiana.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me. Oh, great. Yeah. Again, Lynn, thank you for all of this. And as you noted, this is an area that's going to be taken up by others in the future, and that's a future debate and discussion that we're going to have. I will note that the way that we have done this now is by putting the density into the ANOVA blocks, which then frees up the civic blocks for civic uses. All of us that live here know that the county has stated that certain services, some of which we have received, others we have not, need to go someplace. The indoor athletic facility, the new library, the homeless shelter, possibly a much needed elementary school in years future. All of these things need to go somewhere, and the best place to put them is in what we call the Reston Civic Center area there. As far as the square footage and these sorts of things, I tend to be a little skeptical on some of these issues. I mean, if you take the library at 43,000 square feet, which is actually significantly under the state of Virginia's recommended size for a library for the population that we're looking at in the very near future. I think it's important to keep these there because, look, as we go on and budgets are tight and other priorities emerge and everything, I can see it very easy where someone could decide a smaller library, a more urban library, if you will, is good enough. Well, it's not good enough. We need a full-size library that will take care of the next generation or two of Restonians along here. So for all these reasons, but going back to Lynn's point, which is that all of this is going to be worked over by the new task force, we recommend that we retain the existing language. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Anyone else?
David,
Yes.
Could we have somebody from staff explain their objections or their proposals about the ANOVA blocks and the county-owned properties? It's not clear to me why they're thinking that's a good idea.
It's as though they're taking away our culture. They don't value our culture.
So I'm going to ask if Bill Mayland is on the phone because I think he is probably closest. Lisa said that Tim Sampson has his hand up as well from ANOVA. Yep. So I'm going to ask Bill Mayland, if you're on, would you want to give us a little more insight into the staff position, and then I'll ask Tim Sampson to weigh in. And if Bill, if you'd like to wait for me to ask Tim to go first, that's fine too. It's your call.
Well, Tim can talk about the ANOVA side because I understand he was looking for slightly more density and dwelling units than what's in the current version of the task force. For the county side, the suggestion from staff was to be more generic on that and not to be very specific on uses as well as square footage of uses. At the end of the day, the board's going to decide as a developer what's going to go in there and whether it's appropriate or not. So we had made alternative suggestions, which was still had a lot of those uses identified, but was more generic in terms of where they're located at and in terms of the size of those uses.
Thank you, Bill. Tim.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me? I would
Yes.
gladly show my face, but I don't seem to be able to figure that out. I apologize. So it's Tim Sampson speaking. I represent ANOVA Health System, and we've been, Lynn, you and I spoke about this subject, I think, last fall with John Carter and Bill Mayland and others.
Long time ago, yes.
A long
thank you.
time ago now, and a long time ago, but remarkably, I mean, I think we're kind of in the same place, right? So my interest for raising my hand tonight is just to express the, I think, Dennis described the moving of the residential density, if you will, kind of collecting it on the site and allocating it toward the ANOVA blocks. And ANOVA certainly appreciates that in the attempt to kind of be made whole, if you will. But I think I want to be clear about what's happening here over the entirety of the block, right? Which is really, the block is being downplanned, the entirety of Reston Town Center North, from high residential to medium residential. I mean, it's high on the map today at 50 dwelling units an acre. The recommendation here is to drop that to 20. Again, on behalf of my client, we appreciate the encouragement to push the 20 over to our side, but the math doesn't quite work out. Because 50 units an acre on the ANOVA blocks would yield 1,068 units, and the reference in here is to 940. So there's a 128 unit difference, and over this scale of development, I really don't know why that would be a concern to the task force or the community if the impacts of those additional units can be mitigated, and of course that would be our challenge to meet. But the value inherent in those units is substantial, right? And on a site that has, let's just say, a lot of expectations built into it, and expectations that will continue to be revealed with the new task force and everything else. I don't think that downplanning the site, even in the more limited sense of the density being allocated to ANOVA, is moving in the right direction. And I would encourage the task force to consider that again, and at least, maybe create a range of the 940 units that you've come up with to the 1068 that would be yielded otherwise. I think, again, Bill has articulated, the staff and has understood, I think, our ANOVA's interest to have enough non-residential density out there as well to have flexibility into the future. And again, at 250,000 square feet, it's far less than the existing plan, comp plan would allow for, which is 0.9 FAR. And then the last part of that is that this set of recommendations has a recommendation to drop the building height, which adds the same types of pressures that I was just describing. So again, I would encourage that we, reflect on, not downplanning ANOVA's part of this as we're adding expectations on what might be delivered on the site. The other thing I wanted to add, and I know, there'll be plenty of room to continue to discuss with staff as this gets reconciled, and I will, and I've got other things that I think could be improved in the text. But the one thing I wanted to make sure for the task force's benefit is incorrect. The way it's written right now is the reference to the real estate agreement between ANOVA and the county. That language is written as if that agreement has accomplished an exchange of land to allow the vision for Reston Town Center North to proceed. It has not. That has not happened. What that agreement does is set the wheels in motion so that with the appropriate entitlements in place and development agreements to allow that kind of exchange to happen, the exchanges would take place. But I want to be very clear about that so that nobody has any false expectations about where we sit right now. We sit with property lines that are, I think generously described as gerrymandered on the site. They are now resulting in very constraining circumstances at Reston Town Center North, which many people I know are aware of, with the challenges around the abandoned and now condemned old nursing home. And we need to, be in a place to move forward toward an implementation phase of this project. And I'm concerned that, again, these recommendations are pushing that in the wrong direction. I've been working on this in some form or another with Inova in the county for 12 years now, since before, as the, the original, or not the original, the 2014 plan was starting to take shape in its various committees. We've been up and down and through all kinds of processes, and the one thing that we never thought was that when we closed Cameron Glen, Inova did, in I think it was 15, we thought we were on the brink of turning Reston Town Center North into something at that point in time. And it's surprising to look back, and it's suddenly 6 or 7 years later, and realize we haven't made any progress toward implementation. We've made a lot of progress toward understanding community expectations. But if we're going to get to a place to actually make something happen at Reston Town Center North that fulfills the vision that this group and groups before it and groups after it no doubt will articulate, we've got to, I think, reflect in the plan recommendations that will encourage that implementation and not discourage it. So that's where I would leave my thoughts.
Tim, I really
address any
appreciate,
questions, yeah.
Gary, sorry, Tim, I really do appreciate your perspective. And yeah, I think what you have brought to the floor this evening is important. But the fact that a new task force has been created, the plan language that is in this draft is going to be rewritten. So yeah, I don't know that what we have in the plan language this evening, or at this point in the draft, is even going to be moving forward. So what we're saying is that we should just leave this as is for now, because it's going to be rewritten by a new task force that is being led by Kate Hanley. And maybe Walter, is there something that we can do to help juxtapose what is written in the plan today that is going to help the new task force?
Could
Yeah.
I jump in though for a second?
Yeah, go ahead, Gary, and then I'll.
Tim, I just wanted to say the intention of what we've written in this plan is to try and head that in exactly the direction you're talking about. We may be different in the 250,000. We're at 100,000. And I know that was your proposal, and Bill mentioned that. But the whole intention of this is to make sure all of this works till we end up with a great overall product in line with the initial, plan working through this to that end. So what we have looked at is presentations to the Rest Association, DRB, and others, and so forth, and walkarounds. So that is all what this is based on. So it's focused on making sure this happens for the overall Reston Town Center North, county-owned blocks and your blocks. I can assure you that.
I did not have the understanding that the text was expected to be rewritten for the entirety of Reston Town Center North as part of the next task force group. So if I may be out of step process wise, in which case, Lynn, I agree. I won't belabor everyone's time tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to have stated that, because I think the visibility on our perspective is important, because it's going to continue to be the perspective that I articulate as we get into these next sets of processes. I do wonder, though, if that's the case, that the recommendation of this task force be something of more of a placeholder than having something so specific, so that it isn't. It isn't, if it's not intended to be the final say, then maybe,
Right.
say that, and we'll continue to have the
Right,
conversation.
and that's why I'm asking Walter to provide some kind of a guidance for us in terms of the vision for this task force.
Yeah, I think, yeah, thank you, Lynn. I think the vision is pretty clear. I think by and large, Dennis outlined it. The idea uh, is to put the market development on the Inova property, and then the focus of the county property will be civic uses. And so at this point, I think the new task force, there may be some, I would say, tweaking of the language on the county side. The focus of the new task force is primarily to develop a development master plan for where county facilities and public facilities should go on the county-owned properties. Its focus is, its charge is not to look other than at the Inova owned portions. That's again after the land swap. Tim, thank you for pointing that out. That has not happened yet. But in terms of how the public property will interface with and frankly coordinate development, including some of the roads that go across the civic central green, whatever we're going to call that, how it all fits together, that is in scope of the new task force. I would suggest that in terms of the Inova language in the comp plan, that there just be an understanding that there may be some tweaks that are recommended by staff going forward. But not to change the overall idea, which is in effect making Inova whole, if you will, for market development and having the county-owned properties be focused on civic and public uses. So I think there's some other areas where county staff and you or others are going to be, tweaking the language a little bit. I think with just an understanding that might happen to a small extent, at least on the Inova properties, would make this work.
Walter, this is Mark. Just so I'm clear, then it is. If I'm hearing you correctly, what I understand you to be saying is that the plan that we have in front of us currently will establish by and large what can happen on the Inova parcel, but that the task force that you have working will establish what will happen and the extent of it on the county-owned parcels. And if I'm correct, then that suggests at least that if what Inova is asking for in terms of the additional 250,000 square feet, that change should be done now as opposed to later. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's mostly correct. I don't expect the task force to redo what is recommended. It's in the draft right now. There may be some changes on the square footage. Frankly, there might be a new use or two. There also might be some interim uses, while we wait to get the rec center built, that kind of thing. Maybe there's going to be a dog park. I don't know. Those are things that the task force is going to be looking at. But I would say the task force for the Inova property, if they want to make an adjustment, that's great. But obviously, this is also something that we're still going to have the public engagement period, and I fully expect task force members to be active in that process as well. So,
We
Lynn,
will be.
I would throw it back to you, Lynn, in terms of any
Okay,
changes. that you would want to-
yeah, so as you can imagine,
Lynn,
yes,
John Carter, if I
yes,
could,
please.
I would encourage us to leave it the way it is with the assumption that's, I mean, I hate to go after Walter, but I would encourage us to leave it where it is. We really haven't heard from the county. We've heard from the regulatory part of the county, but we haven't heard from the ownership part of the county. So I would encourage us to leave it the way it is. I would be also concerned that this is not a down zoning. This is a
No.
up zoning. So
Yes, it is.
Wait a second. Wait. I don't mean to. There's a process here that you all are in charge of, and I don't mean to try to take that over. But it's not correct, John, to say that it's an upzoning. It's changing the plan from high residential at 50 units an acre to medium at 20. Again, I appreciate on behalf of my client that the effort is being made to take that density, that would apply site-wide and allow Inova the benefit of that in the attempt to make it whole. The net effect, though, is a down planning on the entirety of the site, and also, as I said earlier, to the extent of 128 some units on the Inova side, which again is not, it's material to the implementation, the ability to implement here. I don't think it's material from a planning perspective, given the scale of what we're talking about.
I get what you're saying, but what the actual, my understanding of the text says 1,000 units minimum is for the Northtown, so there's an entire Northtown Center area, and then a 0.9 FAR. So that this would be, I don't think there's any direct reference to the high density. I think that's perhaps inferred because that's the highest density. And we've had trouble in other areas like this, but the plan actually says a minimum of 1,000 units.
Yeah,
The
that's
intent
Per,
was-
per plan.
The intent was not to downzone, so I just.
But
was
let me just be, it says a minimum of 1,000 units.
I get that. I
And
get that.
0.9 FAR.
I get
And
that.
so if you have to use something as a guide for your maximum on the units, and that's where you turn to the 50 units an acre, because that's your limiting factor on that side of it.
I'm sure, but I'm not sure you would use that for the entire area, the 50 units per acre. Maybe for the Inova parcel, but not the rest. We haven't been out in the community with this. We haven't heard from the county. This is the first time we've heard from Inova really in this kind of setting. I would just encourage us to leave it alone, understanding that there's going to be tweaks and changes to it, and let it flow that way, rather than trying to fine tune it at this point. I really think we're acting a little bit above our knowledge of the area, and I am concerned of 50 units per acre plus 250,000. Now you're getting up at higher than most of the TSAs.
Right.
No, right. If you're only going to allocate residential on the Inova side, the difference is 128 units. And the difference we can talk about, Innova's probably doesn't need all 250,000 square feet. If that's the concern, we should talk about that. And I don't mean to try to solve it now. I appreciate the opportunity to bring it up. John,
Thank you,
but
Tim.
let me say also, John, again, I've been listening to a lot of these and not engaging directly, but it's not the case that this is the first time you've heard from me. When the first draft of this committee's recommendations came out last August, I wrote a letter in September, and we had a meeting in September, and we began this process then. I understood at that time that your decision was, thank you, but we're going to keep going. But I did say all of these very things, 9 months ago. So I don't want folks left with the impression that I've showed up at the 11th and a half hour here.
Hey, Lynn.
We know that, Tim. Thank you. Thank you so much. And,
Lynn?
I really do. Yes.
Hey, just real quick, just remind Tim, there's quite a number of us actually that have worked on Town Center North for 10 or 12 years, and we've gone through all the ups and downs along with everybody else. There were some things, Tim, that I was unfamiliar with. You may have raised them in a different forum than I was, but all these things are things that we can work out. And I'm sure what we want is a Town Center North that's a vibrant area that has life and purpose and attracts people and becomes a jewel for Reston. If we can keep our eye on that, we'll all get there.
Yeah. Thank you, Dennis.
Agreed. And again, I appreciate your indulgence this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Lynn, Mark Malcolm, I'd like to ask two questions based on what we had earlier.
So I hear Mark Malcolm and Jan Bradshaw talking at the same time. So Mark, if you'd go first, and then Jan.
Thank you with this. I really appreciate the comments by Dennis Hayes, Bill Malin, Tim Sampson. For Supervisor Alcorn, this Reston Town Center North Task Force, what is the timeline it has for doing its work with respect to this task force?
Well, good question, Mark. I'm waiting for this task force to wrap up because I don't want overlapping task forces.
Clear.
And then,
Given-
and then it'll be about 6 months.
Okay, given that, what you have is it becomes very clear, except for one point. The one point that's very unclear, the staff recommended moving a performance arts center from the civic side to the Innova side, and that discussion got completely skipped in what we had recently, and it's not really important to discuss it right now, but it's an open issue. The
No, I don't
second,
think that's not true, Mark. There was no movement of the civic side to the Innova side on the Performing Arts Center.
what is in column C is what is exactly is what is said. What's written in the dashboard.
Well,
respect that.
It's, there was no talk about, unless I got past me, and I'm pretty close to this, there was no talk about Performing Arts Center going to the Innova side.
I respect that. Column C in the dashboard doesn't reflect that. That's fine.
I've highlighted the text.
Well,
And-
it's never, I don't know what that is, and, you know.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is either, Mark, to be honest.
Okay. The
It may
second
be a
thing is
conflation
what
with
is
the,
very clear in the with where we are headed in the timeline of getting this wrapped up is you're telling me that once the RTCN task force completes work, there are going to be two different site specific plan updates to the comprehensive plan.
No, the idea is this, Mark, is that the task of the new task force for RTCN is to develop a master plan, which is not a list of facilities, but actually will say, you know, the library is going to go here. It'll say, you know, this is where the human services building is going to go. We just don't have that right now. We have blocks and a list of things. And so in going through that process, there may be some things that become clear that would require a tweaking of the language in, frankly, your recommendation. But I would not envision a retail change, a wholesale change to that language as it goes forward.
You wouldn't suggest that a site-specific plan amendment may be a path forward to deal with what will be a gap, both for the county side as well as for the Innova side. It may be a way to simplify the issues with the Reston Town Center North section, that it be clearly known that those aren't complete with this plan, but will be updated in fairly short order, my SSPAs.
Yeah, the only thing, Mark, is I don't want to slow it down anymore than it's been. That's something to consider, but it may be far enough along. I think it's probably far enough along. We wouldn't need the SSPA process unless there's a change in direction, which I don't anticipate. But I think, well, anyway, John, do you have a thought on that?
I don't think it matters appreciably whether it's an SSPA or whether we can catch up. I don't think it will stretch out appreciably. So it is dangerous to anticipate what's going to happen in the future, but if you want to put the amendment process into it, a sentence about that, I think that might be appropriate.
Yeah, Mark, that'd be fine. And the other thing would be, you know, if we do need, I don't want to do this, but if we need to do an out of turn plan amendment, you know, later on, we can always do that too.
Yeah, see,
Understood. Thank you.
There's
Okay,
different
thanks,
processes. There's different processes that could be created.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
So let me, the language, we don't have the language up, but the plan now says 100,000. And believe it or not, excluding ancillary retail, I think the Performing Arts Center is not on the list. And I think the square footage is off for the HHS building. It's no longer there. So we're trying to respond to Bill Malin a little bit there. So I think that's what the final language says. So again,
I do have it up now, John.
Good.
It's,
There's
yeah.
a list. There's a list there. It's up farther.
There.
Yeah, so yeah, see, the HHS building is there's no square footage. And I think we know the Embry Rucker, and I think you know the size of the library within. So there's not a lot of square footage just there. There is 100,000 instead of the 250 for Inova, and the Performing Arts Center is not in the list. So that's the proposal. And again, I would strongly recommend we stick with what we have, understanding that there's going to be an amendment process of some sort coming back.
Right. Right. So again, the land use working group is recommending that we just, it doesn't make any sense for us to spin our wheels changing this section because it is going to be rewritten
I have a
as we
recommendation,
understand.
Lynn, this is
Yes,
Mike. How
Mike.
then if you assume that it's going to be rewritten, how about some text in this draft, a parenthetical or something that says, given this new task force, we anticipate some of this may be rewritten.
I think that's fine. We'll bring it to the working group.
Okay.
And that is already in there. Finalize the recommendations. New task force will finalize the recommendations.
There you go.
Right.
Danny's right.
That's actually in the draft?
It's in the reconciliation dashboard.
Well, no, I'm asking for it to be in the draft. Because that's what we're going to vote on. We're not voting on this Excel spreadsheet.
Yes, that's fine.
And I guess to that point, I'll go back to my question, which was, is the redrafting applicable just to the county parcel, or are we including the Inova parcel in that conversation?
With the RTCN task force, Mark, it's the county property. But as far as that does relate to the Inova parcel, there could be a little bit of spillover, but it's the task force's mission is to focus on the county.
I get that. And maybe I guess what I'm asking is, should we be punting, and maybe this is not to you, Walter, but it's to Lynn and others. Should we be punting the conversation about the issues that Tim raised, or should we tackle them tonight head on, get those resolved, recognizing that the county portion in terms of uses and square footages and all that other stuff may change in the future, and understanding that, nothing is set in stone here, that if the Kate task force comes back and recommends something that affects the Nova parcel, then that requires additional conversation. But I'm thinking of Tim and Dave Sittler and Inova, and wondering whether we're putting them in a position where they don't know what their outcome is for another 6 or 9 months, or more than that, probably a year at this point.
Town Center North is really made up of people who live in Town Center North. So they will have the best say in what they see. That's the whole purpose of the Town Center task force. And I must say that I'm concerned that the county wants to reduce the library. The library is well used and it's too small. And I think that I don't know why it would be moved from its current location. I thought the plans were to put retail under it and build up. And I don't like the idea of not acknowledging a space, at least for the art center or some other cultural activity, and keep that space for culture. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Lynn,
Jan.
we're not going to do a smaller library. The amphitheater is going to have there's likely to be an amphitheater. We don't know for sure in the Civic Green, where there'll be some sort of outdoor performance venue. That's one of the things the task force is going to be working on. And yeah, and in terms of redoing the library, well, Dennis, I know the Friends don't want us to shut down the library and move to a temporary location for a while, but that's another.
No, and we are keeping it in mind that this is not just a local library. It's not a Reston library. It is a regional library. So that is something that the working group has been considering for the past 2 years as we have considered the language for this portion of the chapter. So Mike, I do have your comment here that we can consider, and we'll bring this back to the working group to add language in the draft to reflect the fact that it is going to be redrafted. Walter, everyone, thank you so much for your comments on this portion. I think we're really bumping up against the 9 o'clock hour. I'm hoping, do we want to take on housing at the Wheelie Metro Station?
Hey, Lynn, I have a suggestion because,
Yes.
why not just beat Reston Town Center North or we have to come back.
Okay, let's do it.
I think on your dashboard, we have that one other Reston Town Center North suggested language to match the health text. And maybe we just finish with Reston Town Center North. I think isn't it the last one on the reconciliation list? And then we would be done with RTCN in its entirety.
Let's see.
Thought it was the last one, if not the second to last one.
It definitely isn't the last one, and it is 9 o'clock.
I know we added.
Is it this one, the coordination with community health?
There you go.
I don't think we should tackle this. I think it's going to take us another 30 minutes to get through this.
That's fine.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that, Jen.
At it again. Fine.
Okay. So, Walter and Lisa, I am so sorry. I was hoping that we would be able to get through the TSAs tonight, but obviously we've had a lot of valuable contributions from the members of the Comprehensive Plan Task Force. And I think that we'll have to reschedule an extension.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, Lynn. I apologize. Some of the delay was probably my fault for talking too much and
no, not at all.
Issues. So
you want to do one more? Do you want to do one more? I just sorry to keep pushing.
Can we do one more and then wrap up?
Yes.
Let's do that, Lynn. Go right ahead.
Okay. So well, we might be able to do 2 more. So housing at the Wheelie Metro Station. So the proposed plan allows housing to be included between the existing TOD area and the South Lakes overpass for a site located east of Wheelie Avenue and north of the Dulles access road. So the task, so this is the working group draft language represents our recommendations. This is something that staff has come around and supported adding housing in this area. And I will say this is the Samuel Morse area. For those that are not familiar, let's see if I can find, let's just do a search for Samuel Morse. Whoops. This is the eastern section between the TOD and the proposed extension of South Lakes Drive North, blah, blah, blah. So originally this area has been designated for low-rise office buildings and surface parking lots. So the redevelopment of residential uses up to 1.0 FAR should be permitted. So that's pretty much what the land use working group is recommending. Staff has agreed with that. So we're considering this reconciled.
Question. Why did we look at adding this designation in this area versus where it hasn't been added anywhere else in any of these locations? Why residential in this one particular area?
This is the area between,
Surrounding by residential.
yeah, this is the area between Midline and Rooney and those developments and the toll road. And you might remember this one, Mike. This came to the P&Z committee last month. So it's separate and it's been out there for a long time. It seemed like it would be better in the mixed use rather than putting industrial there, which is its designation today.
So it's because there's other residential around it?
Yeah,
Yes.
to the west.
Okay.
Thank you. So do y'all want to tackle one more?
Linda, you're on a roll. Why don't you see if you can?
Well, we're going into Roland Clark, so beware. So one more, Roland Clark public uses. So the last site in the Roland Clark neighborhood requires 75-25. The parcel is phase 2 of 2 projects. And it is to house outdoor public space in addition to non-residential. The land use working group reflects that the proposed plan would allow public uses to be allowed to meet the requirement for non-residential uses. So there was added language recommended that the square footage of the indoor, and indoor underlined bold is evident here, indoor public uses and facilities could be applied towards the percentage of expected 25% non-residential uses to provide a public benefit to the broader Reston community. So in our conversations with staff, we had a debate. The staff does not support allowing a public use to be included as a non-residential use. Now, I don't know if that is because the interpretation of a public use may have been outdoor versus indoor. So again, this is resolved, or as Mike Jennings would suggest, we put recommended. Indoor public uses are considered considered non-residential by the land use working group.
Lynn, is there any talk about preserving the house that is there that might have historical significance? There is a house.
No, this is the wrong site.
There's no house.
This is Roland Clark.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yep. No worries, Jan. Thank you.
Yeah, Lynn,
I'll
can we
note- I'll
have
note a
somebody
call.
from staff talk about this?
Yeah. I'm going to call him my best friend, Bill Malin, if he's still here.
I'm listening. Yeah, it's my understanding that, and I wasn't part of these conversations, that the Park Authority was approached about the concept of the facility there and were not interested. That was my understanding. I'm not sure if Chris Caperton's on the line can add more into that. And then we just earlier today didn't the task force specifically want to eliminate the need for to not count public uses. So we're counting the public uses here, but we're not counting public uses elsewhere in the plan. So it's certainly a consistency question.
Mm-hmm.
I think the task force working group, the land use, was thinking about childcare or some service type of public use, not necessarily a park or a recreation, although we'd love that. But some service that's a heavily residential area.
So this is Mark. I can speak to this. I think in one of in one of Lynn's references, they called this the loony site. So I figure it's probably worth me jumping in here.
I think they meant Rooney.
Yeah, we did that.
Yeah. So a little bit of the backstory. the use mix requirement of 75-25 generates a need somewhere in the 160 to 180,000 square foot range for non-residential uses to be able to meet the use mix requirement. And what the owner has been told by the market is that there's the lack of accessibility and visibility at that location has made it unlikely that any non-residential or commercial use would go in there. And so they had proposed to the park authority incorporating pickleball courts and indoor sport courts and some outdoor play space that would be dedicated to the park authority at the location to help satisfy the non-residential use mix component. The park authority's response was, great idea, terrible location, because it lacks visibility, it lacks accessibility, which is the same thing that the commercial non-residential market had been telling them. And so I think the language that's in here is reflective of the owner's proposal to incorporate the pickleball and indoor sport courts at this location. But as Bill said, the park authority's response was, thanks, but no thanks. And so it still leaves the open question of whether at locations like this, 75-25 is necessarily the appropriate target given the challenges of what even the park authority has recognized. And I'll stop there.
I'd like to comment on this. This is Tammy, and this is phase 2 of a project where phase 1 was maxed out to the nth degree, and we were waiting for phase 2 for amenities for the residents of phase 1. And so now we're getting, oh, wait a minute, we can't do that. I'm really interested that the Fairfax County Park Authority thinks that any place that they located a pickleball facility or sports court would not be highly used. People are dying for that kind of space. So it doesn't need visibility. Pickleball, people are like truffle pigs. They will find it. There is such a huge demand for that. So I don't buy into. I think we need to go back and talk to the park authority. There's something wrong with that conclusion, and that kind of use would be fabulous.
Yes.
This is Chris.
Thank you, Tammy. Chris?
Thank you. Chris Caverton from the Planning Department. The Park Authority did not want a use that was inside of a private building. They do not operate courts inside of residential buildings. And they thought that this was very much a look and feel like a private and not a public recreational use. They were still interested in talking to the applicant, or there's no application, to the representatives about other possibilities, but I don't think they're interested in meeting with the park authority. So just to be clear, the park authority was not in favor of the location of pickleball courts inside of that building. It was not something that they were interested in owning and operating.
Thank you,
Chris, I beg to differ, honestly, and we can have this conversation offline, because I'm gonna pull up an email that we got from them that was pretty clear, that describes their position on it. And we can take this offline, because I don't know that it necessarily is worth the rest of the task force's time to figure it out. But the sentence reads, we have several concerns with the proposal that make it difficult for us to support it at this juncture. Some of the challenges that bring into question the viability of other non-residential uses in this location would also be concerns for the proposed public recreational use. We're concerned that the vertical integration would lead to public uses perceived as private. And so there's other things that they had in I guess questions and concerns about it, but we can talk about it offline. But
Thank you, Mark.
It's not as clear cut. I'll put it that way.
Thank you. Did I,
John,
sorry.
you know, it says public use. It doesn't say park. Park would be one type of public use, but there are many other public uses that might be appropriate for the area. So the word is public use. It's not necessarily park use.
Right. Thank you. Good discussion, Mark and Chris. We will look forward to hearing the results of any resolution that you all might come to on this. But did I see Dennis Hayes trying to get a word in?
Indeed. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. Again, much like Town Center North, there's a number of us on this call that are veterans of this particular issue. I remember, again, like Tammy, when the first building was put up, and there were a lot of questions, and most of them were deferred by saying everything will be put together with the second completion of this. You know, the area that we're talking about is a service desert right now. I mean, in addition to the housing that's already there, the SECAS housing and all these others, that there are no services in this area, which means, and they're not really walkable to anywhere else. So I think I recognize it might be a challenge to come up with public uses for this area, but I think that it's worth making the effort because right now there is nothing in that area to service all of those people that live there.
Thank you, Dennis. And the setbacks have been eliminated. So, I mean, there's just no room for anything. Anyway, okay. I think that if there's no additional comment on the Roland Clark public uses, the recommendation from the land use working group is that the indoor public uses be considered non-residential use by the task force. So are there any issues with that? Okay, thank you. So Walter, I think that it makes sense for us to use this row number 11, Roland Clark Public Uses, as our stopping point for this evening. And I will work with Amanda and Lisa to schedule our continued review of the land use chapter.
Great. Thank you very much, Lynn. Thank you, everybody. I know we've gone over a little bit. It's not the first time we've done this, but Lynn, I think there's a lot of good discussion tonight, making progress. So July 20th, I believe, is the next task force date. Let's, Lynn, talk with my office and DPD staff. Perhaps that could be the date for coming back and finishing this off. We do have several other chapter leads, as we discussed earlier, that are having meetings with staff. We will work in my office to try to make sure those meetings happen as soon as possible, and also to try to make sure that feedback is provided with some urgency. So I think we're pretty much now set for at least the next meeting or two. Any additional business before the task force tonight, before we break?
Walter, I'd really like to get the equity chapter before the task force.
Okay. When is there a meeting scheduled on that, or what's the status?
We sent the final version right before 4th of July, and we haven't heard anything back.
Okay.
I think
Supervisor Alcorn,
Yes,
St.
St.
Clair,
Clair,
my DPD. Amanda from your office is going to be working to try to schedule a meeting. I think we're trying to get a meeting scheduled for next week with staff and Jennifer and whoever else is on the subcommittee working on equity.
Great. Okay.
Okay.
That sound okay, Jennifer?
Can we see, I need edits before we do a meeting. And I'll be honest, guys, like I'm really getting to the end of what I can handle when it comes to going back and forth.
And I would comment on this. This is Tammy.
Here for a second.
I have,
I'd like to just follow along with what Jennifer is saying there. I mean, I know Supervisor Alcorn, you just said where, you know, you're gonna try and get those other meetings scheduled. But, you know, as Jennifer just mentioned with equity, and then we have parks and open space, anything that can be done to get those things back to Jennifer and get the meeting scheduled, because I think we can get them done pretty quickly if we can get, you know, some movement. I'm sorry to add that.
No, thank you, Gary. We'll try. The problem with equity, I'm hearing from staff, is they really want a data-driven approach. And frankly, the task force has a different emphasis, and it is a reconciliation challenge. Tammy, did you have some comments, please?
I'd like to say something about
Please.
this. I read this chapter. It's very short. It's beautifully written. It's exactly what Reston is about. I have no clue what the problem would be with the county of this. It is absolutely amazing, and I think we should hear it. And that may be one of the deals, that this is such a short chapter. These people who've worked on it worked their guts out. And I think Commissioner Carter commented he thought it was done a couple weeks ago. So let's see it. And if the staff doesn't like it, that'll be one that'll have two versions, but it's beautifully done. I'm exceedingly impressed.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy.
Thank you.
All right. Any other comments, issues before we wrap up? Yes.
Sorry, Walter, I
No,
just
go
wanted to
ahead.
say thank you all to everyone, but specifically the land use working group and staff that has worked with us on this chapter. I'm very proud of what we've presented. So I want to thank you all so much for entertaining us and providing us with your feedback and your review and your feedback and edits. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lynn. Okay, so let's then, if there's no other business, let's go ahead and end tonight, and we'll get back with the whole task force on the 20th and expect some other meetings in between with specific chapters. So, all right, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Walter, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.